we moved to a new neighborhood. Our neighbors are planning something sinister. Moving into a new home is always a mix of excitement and anxiety. For the Miller family, it was a fresh start in the idyllic suburb of Crestwood. Mark and I had been looking for a place like this for years, a picturesque neighborhood where we could raise our two children, Jake and Emma, and our Labrador, Max. After years of hard work and saving, Crestwood seemed like a dream come true. I met Mark in college. We both was studying engineering. Our love blossomed over late-night study sessions and shared dreams of building a life together. After graduation, we got married and started our family in a small apartment in the city. As our careers progressed and our children grew, we longed for more space and a safer environment for Jake and Emma. Crestwood, with its manicured lawns, white picket fences, and friendly neighbors, seemed perfect. When we first drove into Crestwood, it felt like stepping into a postcard. The sun was shining, children were playing in the streets, and there was a palpable sense of community. Our new house, a charming two-story colonial, stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. It had a big yard for Max to play in and enough space for the kids to have their own rooms. We couldn't wait to start our new life there. The first few days in our new home were blissful. We spent our time unpacking, decorating, and getting to know our neighbors. The Johnsons next door brought over a welcoming pie, and the Andersons across the street invited us to a barbecue. Everyone was so friendly, almost too friendly, but we dismissed our unease as mere paranoia from moving stress. On the third night, I was awakened by a low, rhythmic chanting. I looked at the clock, 3:13 a.m. My husband, Mark, stirred beside me, and I shook him awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He groggily nodded. "What is that?" We peered out the window and saw a group of our neighbors gathered in a circle in the Andersons' backyard. They were holding candles and chanting in a language I couldn't recognize. It was eerie, but we convinced ourselves it was some sort of harmless, albeit strange, tradition. We went back to bed, trying to ignore the knot of unease in our stomachs. The next morning, we decided to ask Mrs. Johnson about the late-night gathering. She laughed it off, saying it was just a neighborhood meeting and not to worry. Her reassurance was unconvincing, but we chose to let it go. Over the next few days, we noticed more odd behaviors. The neighbors seemed to have an unspoken understanding, a silent communication that left us feeling like outsiders. When we waved or tried to engage them in conversation, their responses were polite but distant, as if they were hiding something. One morning, while I was gardening in the front yard, I saw Mr. Anderson walking his dog. As he passed by our house, he glanced over his shoulder and quickly looked away when he saw me watching. It was a fleeting moment, but it sent a chill down my spine. What were they hiding? Over the next few weeks, small, strange events began to pile up, each one adding to our growing sense of unease. It started with little things. Our mail would be delivered in odd, cryptic arrangements on our porch, or we'd find our garbage cans moved to strange locations. One evening, we found a small wooden carving of an unfamiliar symbol left on our doorstep. When we asked our neighbors about it, they just smiled and said it was a welcome gift, but their eyes held an unsettling glint. One night, while tucking Jake into bed, he asked me why the neighbors always stared at our house. I brushed it off, telling him they were just curious about the new family, but I had noticed it too. Whenever we went outside, it felt like dozens of eyes were watching us, observing our every move. Another evening, while Mark and I were watching TV, the power suddenly went out. We grabbed flashlights and candles, and I went to check the breaker. As I stepped outside, I saw the entire street was dark, except for the Andersons' house. Their windows glowed with an eerie, pulsating light. I felt a shiver of fear but quickly dismissed it, thinking it was just a generator. A particularly disturbing incident occurred during a Saturday afternoon. We were having a family picnic in our backyard when we heard a loud crash from inside the house. Rushing in, we found that the glass coffee table in the living room had shattered, but nothing seemed to have caused it. No one was inside, and there was no sign of an intruder. We were all puzzled and on edge. Things took a darker turn when Max disappeared. One evening, he was playing in the backyard, and the next morning he was gone. We searched everywhere, posted flyers, and asked the neighbors, but no one had seen him. Jake and Emma were heartbroken, and so were we. It felt like a piece of our family was missing. Mark and I decided to organize a neighborhood search party for Max. The neighbors were surprisingly willing to help, but as the hours passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't truly looking for him. It was as if they already knew he wouldn't be found. One night, while Mark and I were discussing what to do next, we heard a scratching noise coming from the basement. We grabbed a flashlight and cautiously went down to investigate. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, the scratching stopped. We searched the entire basement but found nothing out of the ordinary. It was as if whatever had been making the noise had vanished. The following night, Jake came running into our bedroom, crying and saying he had seen a man standing at the foot of his bed. We rushed to his room but found no one there. We reassured him it was just a bad dream, but the fear in his eyes told us he truly believed what he had seen. A few days after Max's disappearance, I started feeling a constant, unnerving sensation of being watched. It was a prickling feeling on the back of my neck, an awareness that made me glance over my shoulder frequently. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but it persisted, gnawing at my peace of mind. One evening, after putting Jake and Emma to bed, I was sitting in the living room, trying to read a book. The house was quiet, with Mark working late at his office. As I tried to focus on the words, that familiar sensation crept over me. I looked up and glanced around the room, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, but there was no one. Unable to shake the feeling, I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain aside slightly, peeking out into the night. My breath caught in my throat as I saw them, our neighbors, standing in their yards, staring directly at our house. They were perfectly still, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of the streetlights. Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Anderson, the Smiths, the Parkers, every single one of them was just standing there watching. I quickly let the curtain fall back into place, my heart pounding in my chest. I backed away from the window, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Why were they all standing out there? What were they doing? I grabbed my phone and called Mark, my hands trembling. It rang several times before he answered. "Hey, what's up?" he said, sounding distracted. "Mark, something's wrong," I whispered, not wanting to wake the kids. "The neighbors, they're all outside, just staring at our house." "Are you sure?" he asked, his tone shifting to concern. "Yes, I'm sure. I don't know what they're doing, but it's creepy. Can you come home?" "I'll leave now," he said. "Just stay inside and lock the doors. I'll be there soon." I hung up and double-checked the locks on all the doors and windows. Then I went upstairs to check on Jake and Emma. They were sound asleep, unaware of the unsettling scene outside. I kissed them both on the forehead, my anxiety momentarily easing. Back downstairs, I paced the living room, glancing nervously at the windows. I couldn't bring myself to look outside again. Instead, I waited for Mark, my mind racing with possibilities. Were they planning something? Was this part of some bizarre ritual? When Mark finally arrived, he found me sitting on the couch, hugging a pillow to my chest. He came over and pulled me into a tight embrace. "It's going to be okay," he said softly. "Let's take a look together." Reluctantly, I followed him to the window. He peeked out first, then motioned for me to join him. When I looked outside again, the neighbors were gone. The street was empty, as if nothing had happened. "I swear they were there," I insisted, feeling a mixture of relief and frustration. "I believe you," Mark said. "Something weird is definitely going on here. Let's keep an eye out and document anything unusual." We decided to set up a camera facing the front yard to capture any strange activity. As Mark installed it, I could not shake the image of our neighbors' blank, staring faces from my mind. What were they up to? And what did it have to do with us? A few nights later, while putting Emma to bed, I noticed strange symbols carved into the wall above her bed. They were intricate, almost runic, and definitely not something a child could have done. My blood ran cold as I traced the lines with my fingers. Mark came in and saw my horrified expression. "What is it?" he asked, his eyes widening as he saw the carvings. "Who did this?" "I don't know," I whispered, "but it wasn't here before." We decided to check the rest of the house. To our horror, we found similar symbols carved into the walls of our bedroom, the kitchen, and even the basement. It was as if someone had been marking our home, room by room. That night, the chanting returned. This time, it was louder and seemed to come from all directions. We watched the security footage the next morning and saw shadowy figures moving around our house, their faces obscured. They were carving the symbols while we slept. We knew we had to get out, but we didn't know how to do it without raising suspicion. The neighbors were always watching, always smiling that same unsettling smile. We decided to play along, acting as if everything was normal while we planned our escape. A week after discovering the symbols, we woke up to find our front door wide open. Right on the porch lay Max's collar, stained with what looked like blood. My heart shattered and fear turned into sheer panic. We had to leave, now. That night, we packed our essentials and quietly gathered the kids. We snuck out through the back door, hoping to reach our car unnoticed. But as we stepped into the yard, we were met by the entire neighborhood, standing in a circle, blocking our path. They were holding candles, their eyes cold and devoid of emotion. "Where are you going?" Mrs. Johnson asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We're leaving," Mark said firmly. "Get out of our way." "You can't leave," Mr. Anderson said, stepping forward. "The ritual must be completed." The neighbors closed in, chanting in that same guttural language. We tried to push through, but there were too many. They grabbed us, pulling us back toward the house. Jake and Emma screamed, and I fought with all my strength, but it was no use. We were dragged into the Andersons' backyard, where a makeshift altar had been set up. The symbols carved into our walls were painted around it in what looked like blood. They tied us to wooden stakes, and my mind raced, trying to think of a way out. The chanting grew louder, and Mr. Anderson stepped forward, holding a large, ancient-looking book and a large knife. He began to read from the book, and the air grew cold. Shadows seemed to come alive, writhing and twisting in the darkness. "Please, stop," I screamed. but my voice was drowned out by the chanting. Just as Mr. Anderson was about to finish the incantation, a loud crash echoed through the yard. Everyone turned to see a figure burst through the fence, wielding a flashlight and a shotgun. It was an older man, his face lined with determination. "Let them go," he shouted, advancing toward the circle. He reached us in a few strides, cutting the ropes that bound us with a hunting knife he pulled from his belt. "Who are you?" Mark asked, his voice shaking with relief and confusion. "My name's Samuel," the man replied, keeping his eyes on the cultists. "I used to live in your house. I know what these people are capable of." The neighbors began to regroup, their eyes filled with malevolent determination. Samuel pulled us to our feet and pushed us toward the gap in the fence. He screamed for us to run. We didn't need to be told twice. Mark grabbed Jake and I scooped up Emma as we sprinted through the gap and into the woods beyond. The sounds of the struggle behind us spurred us on, fear lending speed to our steps. We didn't stop running until we reached the main road, where we flagged down a passing car. The driver, a kind older woman, took one look at our terrified faces and immediately offered us a ride. We piled into her car, and she drove us to the nearest police station. We reported everything: Max's disappearance, the symbols, the chanting, and Samuel's rescue. The police took our statements seriously, but when they went to investigate, the neighbors had vanished, and there was no sign of the altar. We never saw Samuel again, but we will always be grateful to him for saving our lives. We left Crestwood that night, never looking back. We found a new home far away, where we could start fresh. But the memories of that place haunted us, a reminder of the darkness that can hide behind the most picturesque facades. The Miller family had survived, but we would never forget the night our new neighbors revealed their true nature and the brave man who saved us from their sinister plans.